I clearly remember the day everything changed. We were together, the 12 of us, in an upper room, where tension hung in the air. The Master had departed, and the promise of the Holy Spirit still echoed in our minds. But you will receive power when the Holy Spirit comes upon you. Acts 1:8. Expectation and fear mingled in our hearts. What would come next? What would this new life mean without Jesus by our side? There we were, surrounded by a mix of emotions: sadness from the loss, hope from the promise, and the responsibility to carry the message he entrusted to us. We knew we were about to face immense challenges. The mission to spread the gospel seemed almost impossible, and one thought haunted our minds: what if we failed? What would happen to the people who needed to hear about love and salvation? But there was a flame within us, a determination not to let our Master's legacy die. What would really happen to us, the apostles, on the journey ahead? What challenges would we face, and how could we persevere? Little did we know that great adventures and trials awaited us. If you are curious to know how the story of the apostles unfolded and the challenges they faced, subscribe to our channel and follow this incredible journey. Gradually, the reality of our new life began to settle in. The previous routine, marked by the teachings and guidance of the Master, now felt distant. In the early days, we tried to meet frequently to discuss what to do. It was a sincere effort, but the conversations often ended in silence as each of us dealt with our own fears. One morning, while we were having coffee, Peter broke the silence. We need to take action. We can't just sit here waiting for what will happen. The Master left us a mission. His gaze was firm, but I saw the insecurity behind his bravado. What if we don't know what to say? What if we can't? I retorted, my voice trembling. We all felt the weight of responsibility, but no one dared to admit how terrified we were. John, always the most introspective, spoke softly. Maybe we should. Start with those we already know. The people in our lives, our friends and family, they need to hear the truth. There was wisdom in his words, but the idea of confronting our loved ones with such a radical message left me uneasy. What if they didn't believe? What if they turned their backs on us? That same week, we decided to visit the temple. As we walked through the busy streets of Jerusalem, the murmur of voices around us felt like a distant echo. Fear was present with every step, and uncertainty hung over us like a heavy cloud. Let's split into smaller groups. That way, it will be less scary, suggested Andrew, trying to ease the tension. The idea seemed reasonable, but at the same time it left me anxious. What if one of us was attacked or insulted? The world outside was changing, and our message was unwelcome in many places. The first day was a difficult test. We found a few people willing to listen, but most looked at us with suspicion. I clearly remember a lady who, upon hearing our proposal to share the Master's words, simply shook her head and said, "Leave me alone with your ideas." The rejection was a hard blow. By the end of the day, as we gathered again, I could see the discouragement in each of us. Our eyes reflected the internal struggle and frustration. The atmosphere was heavy, and the weight of responsibility felt greater than ever. It was at that moment that a new challenge emerged. A group of religious leaders began to watch us closely. They were aware of our presence and our intentions. What would we do now? We were about to enter a conflict that would change everything. The atmosphere was charged with tension. With each passing day, I realized that the challenge we faced was much greater than we had imagined. It was not just about communicating the message the Master had left us. It was also about positioning ourselves against a rising tide of resistance around us. Expressions of distrust and hostility were becoming increasingly common, and I could feel the anxiety spreading among us like a shadow. When the group of religious leaders began to observe us, fear intensified. They were respected and powerful figures, and the thought of confronting them left me in a panic. What would we say to them? How would we defend our mission in front of people who had the power to silence us? Each of us knew that we were at a breaking point, and that our choices from that moment on could have devastating consequences. That night, as we tried to discuss the next step, the tension within the group became palpable. Pedro, who had always been the most optimistic, began to question whether we were ready for this. "What if it all ends badly? What if we lose everything?" he said, his voice heavy with uncertainty. His vulnerability sparked an echo of doubts in all of us. I began to wonder if we would be able to withstand the pressure and rejection we were facing. Inside, I struggled with my own insecurities. The responsibility of conveying the Master's message felt like too heavy a burden. What if I failed? What if my voice went unheard? The thought of seeing my friends suffer because of our choices terrified me. As each of us wrestled with our own demons, the group became an emotional battleground where trust started to wear thin. The religious leaders were not just an obstacle. They were a sign that we were about to enter a struggle that could define our future. I felt that with every step we took, we were getting closer to a precipice. The decisions we made now could lead us to new dilemmas, and the uncertainty about what was to come kept us in a constant state of alert. What truly awaited us around the next corner? The answer seemed distant, and the only certainty was that there would be no turning back. I looked at the tired faces of my friends and felt the weight of responsibility pressing on my chest. The tension that permeated the air was almost unbearable. With each passing day, the decisions we made seemed to intertwine like a ball of yarn, each choice pulling another in unexpected directions. Pedro, with his worried expression, was a constant reminder that uncertainty surrounded us. Our conversations, which had once been filled with hope and faith, were now rife with doubts and fears. Our mission was becoming more complex as the religious leaders intensified their scrutiny. Every word we spoke could be bait for criticism, and the idea of being silenced by those who were supposed to be our guides was terrifying. One day, as we discussed how to approach the crowd, I remembered the Master's words, "If the world hates you, know that it hated me first." That passage echoed in my mind, but at the same time I wondered if we were ready to face that hate. The decisions we had made in the past few days created a domino effect. By choosing to gather and share the message, we made it clear that we were willing to challenge the established order. This put us on a point of no return, and there was no ignoring the consequences it would bring. The growing hostility from the community made us feel as if we were constantly under a watchful eye, and the pressure was palpable. My emotions fluctuated from hope to despair in a matter of moments. The idea of failing, not just as a group, but as friends, consumed me. With each new day, the expectation of a confrontation became more real, and the tension mounted. I knew we were approaching an inevitable climax, and it left me anxious. What would happen when we finally faced those who opposed us? Would we be able to stand firm in our convictions, or would we allow fear to take over? The decisions we had made so far were leading us to this crucial moment, and I couldn't shake the butterflies in my stomach. It was as if we were about to cross a line that would change everything forever. I felt my heart race as we made our way to the center of the square, where the crowd was already gathering. The murmur of voices was like a distant roar, and the tension in the air was almost tangible. I looked at Pedro and the others, all of them seeming nervous but determined. We knew this would be the moment that defined our path. With a deep breath, I stepped forward, feeling the need to be the voice of hope amidst despair. "Friends, we are here not to cause division, but to share a message of love and compassion," I began, my voice echoing among the stones of the square. I noticed some expressions of skepticism, but I also saw curious faces. With each word that came from me, the pressure increased, as if the air were being squeezed from our lungs. I was aware of the risk we were taking, but the urgency of our mission outweighed the fear. The crowd's response was immediate. Some began to murmur, others turned to whisper among themselves. A group of religious leaders stood out in the crowd, their penetrating gazes like sharp blades. What had once been a whisper of hope was now turning into a cry for truth. "What do you have to say against our tradition? How can you challenge what we have been taught?" one of them shouted, his voice laden with indignation. I felt the weight of their words, but I could not back down. "We are not here to disrespect, but to renew faith and bring light where there is darkness," I replied, my voice growing stronger. The atmosphere changed. Reactions intensified, faces contorted in confusion and anger. Some of my friends behind me began to move nervously, but I stood firm, looking directly at the leaders. In that moment, I realized we were at a point of no return. The fear that had once dominated us was now eclipsed by the adrenaline of the fight for truth. The consequences of our actions began to unfold before us. A confrontation was forming, and the line between faith and doubt was about to be crossed. What would happen next was not just about us, but about the community and the future we dreamed of. The tension was palpable, and I knew we were about to find out if our courage would be enough to face what was to come. The tension in the square was palpable, and the air seemed to vibrate with expectation. As voices rose, I realized the situation was about to explode. The group of religious leaders advanced, ready to contest our words. But instead of backing down, I felt a wave of determination wash over me. "We are all here for a reason," I continued, trying to calm the tempers. "Love is the essence of our belief, and that is what we want to celebrate." Time seemed to stop as I watched the crowd. Some people began to nod positively, agreeing with what I was saying. With each passing moment, the message of unity and hope seemed to gain strength, and the previously skeptical faces began to soften. Then something incredible happened. One of the leaders, who had seemed so unyielding, took a step back as if reconsidering his convictions. The crowd began to split, with some joining us while others were still reluctant. The debate took shape, but in a constructive way. Voices intertwined in passionate conversations, and the energy of the square shifted. It was no longer a battleground, but a space for dialogue. With my heart racing, I realized we had planted the seed of change. In the end, the crowd dispersed, but not without exchanging glances of understanding and promises of a better future. My friends and I looked at each other, a mix of relief and joy on our faces. We had faced fear, and together we began to build a path of hope. The great lesson we took from that day was that courage is not the absence of fear, but the willingness to act despite it. I learned that true faith is manifested in acts of love and compassion, even when challenged. The square, which had once been a stage of distrust, became a symbol of transformation. And as we look to the future, we realize that love, when shared, has the power to unite and heal, creating a legacy that will endure.